But I might have just made the greatest fight cards for the rest of the year of 2026. Listen, guys, we have started off to a rough start throughout the year. Starting out with Gaethje versus Pimblett, which was not a title fight. That was the number 6 fighter in the lightweight division versus the number 7 fighter. And then in late January, you had Volk versus Lopez 2. Not a fight anyone wanted to see. I wanted to see Volk versus Murphy. Okay, keep on adding to his legacy. Next fight is you have the BMF title fight. You have Oliveira versus Holloway. Should have been a banger. It didn't deliver. Okay, I'm glad in April we have a banger coming up with Yuri versus Olberg. Although, in my opinion, it should have been Yuri versus Ankalaev. All right. Anyways, here's what I would do to make every single card absolutely electric for the rest of 2026. Okay. Starting off for July and International Fight Week. Okay, I've already made a video on this, but if you didn't watch that video, only 2 of you guys did. Here's what I got to think. Okay, so with the featured fight of the night, I'm going to have Nunes versus Pena 4. Okay, I know this sounds absurd, but this is going to be for the interim belt for the next one to fight, Kayla Harrison. Okay. Listen, I know a lot of you guys wouldn't be very pumped up, but it's International Fight Week. I think you got to get the Lioness back on the card, and I think it's smart for her to get a fight before Harrison gets in the octagon with her. Get a little bit of that ring rust off. Get her to fight Pena, and we all hope Pena doesn't win. You could do Raquel Pennington too, but I don't think anyone wants to see that fight either. But I think this would be a good feature fight. Get the Lioness back. You would kind of see that hype, a little bit of that glaze, and then you would get to see the showdown of Nunes versus Harrison and later on in the year. But I think to set it up, I think you do it at International Fight Week with Nunes versus Pennington 4. But for the interim belt, not for the undisputed. Okay, for the co-main of the night, I would have Islam Makhachev versus Ian Gary. I know you might be saying, this sounds ridiculous. How is this not the main event? We'll get there. Okay, I think that this is obviously the fight to make in their welterweight division. I just did a video talking about how Ian Gary and Islam Makhachev just seem destined to fight for each other for the belt. And I think that Ian Gary, honestly, isn't a tough matchup for Islam Makhachev. Although I do think Ian Gary is deserving, and I do think he should be next up, and not Michael Morales. I think Islam would straight up school him. Although he might have troubles on the feet, I don't see him taking the fight there, and I think it would be a lot like the JDM fight. And for the main event of the night, I think you got to bring back the Mac. I think the Mac has to be back fighting against Colby Covington, guys. Okay, I think that this would be a really, really, really fun fight. And if Conor wins, you might see him back in January, in my opinion, guys. I think that if Conor wins this, you get him in a number 1 contenders fight against, who could you put him against, a JDM if he loses the protest, and Conor might be back for the belt. But just starting here, honestly, obviously, Conor will never win the belt again. But I think he could beat Colby, and this is how you headline International Fight Week. He was talking about it earlier today, actually, about how he is a lock to fight for July, and I think the only matchup that really makes sense for him is a Colby Covington matchup, unless you want to do Leon Edwards, kind of what Bedtime was talking about, but I think Colby would just be a little bit more fun. Okay, going on to July. I think you put 2 cards into July. Every year, they do 1 month with 2 cards, and I think the UFC is in such a drought that you need to make big championship fights. Okay, you clearly didn't do it for the White House. You only had 2 championship fights. I think you do back-to-back huge cards. Back-to-back-to-back huge cards. Bring the life back into the fan base. Okay, you would have this belt, this, and then the Conor belt, all going up against each other. And then 2 weeks later in July, starting off with a featured fight, I would have Weili versus Mackenzie Dern. I would actually be very excited for this fight. Okay, I think that Weili would honestly school Mackenzie Dern, get her belt back. But honestly, it's worth to see. I'd be interested to see what Mackenzie Dern could offer. Again, I think that Weili would win. Weili would definitely be favored to win this fight. And as the co-main event of the night, listen, a hardcore's delight. We're going to do Merab versus Jan 3. I know Jan is coming off back surgery, but honestly, by the time that we're in July, he got the surgery done in early December. He should be good to go. Listen, this is the fight in the bantamweight division. We're not going to have Sean O'Malley, and the winner of this could face him unless it's Merab, which no one wants to see that. And then it gets dicey. But listen, this is the fight to make. Jan versus Merab 3. Both of them are 50-45 to each other. I honestly would probably take Jan in the third fight, but I think this is just such a interesting and intriguing fight. Although I don't think it should necessarily headline a card because off the dominant win that Jan is coming off of. But I do think that this should be the main event of the fight. You'd have Volk versus Movsar. You can do this fight card wherever you want, probably in Vegas. Volk versus Movsar, another huge banger fight. Not Gene Silva, guys. Not Gene Silva. Okay, having these three real fights that hardcores really want, okay? The hardcore fans really want to see Volk versus Movsar. The hardcore fans really want to see Jan versus Merab. Merab defended his belt 4 times. It is a travesty if he doesn't get another crack at it without having to fight another guy. Same thing with Weili. Weili defended her about 5 times. I would love to see her fight Mackenzie Dern. Okay, I know these 2 back-to-back cards sound pretty unrealistic. The most unrealistic part is probably having Ian Gary fight Islam, to be honest. Or Islam and Conor being on the same card. But anyways, this is what I would do. I think you've got to stack the month of July and really bring back some hype. Okay, I understand of how stacked those last 2 cards were, so we're going to slow it down a little bit for August. Okay, so for August, we're going to have Valentina Shevchenko versus Natalia Silva. Again, I'm actually weirdly looking forward to all of these women's title fights coming up. Although this one probably wouldn't be the most fun, I do think in this one I actually would be looking forward to. I think Natalia Silva could give Shevchenko a fight. I'd probably take Shevchenko just because of how dominant she looked in her last one against Weili. This is a big fight, though, and I'd be really interested to see how well Natalia Silva can do with her crafty boxing in there against a Valentina Shevchenko. And headlining the card for the BMF belt, we're going to do Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. Okay, I think this is just simply the fight to make. Since you're doing Ilya versus Gaethje at the White House, you need to set up that next contender. And even if Oliveira wins this fight, I, in absolutely no interest, want to see him fight Topuria again. Under no circumstances, unless they meet up at 170 one day, which will not be happening. Okay, listen, Arman stepping in, winning the BMF belt would bring his hype to an all-time high. Listen, guys, that hype is already high, and I think winning the BMF belt, putting it on the line against Ilia Topuria later on in this year would be huge, okay? Finally, we would have that real guy, that real contender to fight Ilia Topuria. It's not been Gaethje. The only last real contender, I guess, was Holloway. No one really thought Oliveira was going to win, but no one expected him to get knocked out as quick as he did. But anyways, I think Oliveira versus Arman 2, headlining the August card. Again, not a super stacked card. You do have 2 championship fights, or 1 championship fight, but I think that this one does make sense. September, again, since we've kind of used so many big fights in July and June, I think it does make sense to take a step back in September. We're going to do a Pantoja main event. Okay, I think Tatsuro Taira beats Joshua Van. I think he's just going to use the wrestling. It's just going to be a little bit too much for him. And I think it is the return of Alexandre Pantoja. Can he win the belt back at the age of 36 years old against Tatsuro Taira? I think that this would be a really interesting fight. Honestly, give me Pantoja, man. And seeing him win the belt, I think that's a big enough fight. You know, you add 1 or 2 number 1 contenders fights below this fight, and this is a banger card, okay? I know normally later in the year the cards get more stacked, but September, I think this is okay, especially if you see what I got cooking later. Okay, October, we're going to have 2 championship fights. And for the co-main of the night, we are going to have Khamzat Chimaev versus Brendan Allen. You might be asking, where's Imavov? Well, I'm going to have Imavov fighting DDP and losing to DDP. DDP's style is simply too dangerous for Imavov, and I don't see Imavov making it alive. However, Brendan Allen is getting the layup of the century against Edmund Shabazian, and I don't see him losing that fight. And I also don't see Israel Adesanya getting a shot against Khamzat Chimaev. Who else could reasonably get this shot? I mean, are you going to give it to a Sean Strickland? He loses, and you can't give it to DDP. So it is going to be a Brendan Allen title shot. I mean, we can take a look over here too. Maybe a Kyle Brallo, but I don't really see that happening. I think this is a Brendan Allen title shot. And I think the Sean Strickland main event is going to be so boring that you don't want to main event Khamzat again. You want him as the co-main, but you still got to get him, keep him active. And the reason why you're making him the co-main is to set up him against the winner of this fight, Yuri Prochazka against Magomed Ankalaev. Really, the biggest question right now in the light heavyweight division is, who is Magomed Ankalaev going to fight? I have him fighting Volkan Ozdemir, but that's only because Yuri's got to fight. Olberg's got to fight. Jan's got to fight. And maybe Khalil Roundtree, but he's coming off a loss, and I don't want to see that. I would have rather seen Ankalaev versus Blachowicz too. But obviously, that's not the fight to make right now. So, Ankalaev, let's say he fights Volkan Oezdemir. He beats him. He maybe knocks him out. Then you get to see Yuri or Olberg. I think Yuri wins. Is going to be fighting Ankalaev for that belt. And if Khamzat wins, you could get that face-off. Honestly, I would prefer that Khamzat does not get a shot at the belt. I would prefer him to defend his belt. It depends. If he wins double champ status, at least another 3 times. I would like him to beat maybe an Izzy. I like him to beat a Berhaljo. I would like him to beat a Nasruddin Imavov. I do not want to see him step in the octagon with DDP. We clearly see how that fight went. I do not want to see that fight. But I do want to see him fight Brendan Allen in October after he cleans up shop with Sean Strickland. Coming on to November. Here's what I got for November. I think that we're getting to the point in the year where this is the biggest fight of all time. We're going to make Tom Aspinall versus Alex Pereira at heavyweight, okay? Listen, I don't understand why the UFC can't make the majority of these fights, okay? I understand how stacked my July is, and I understand that's tough to make. But if we're going to do this fight and we're setting this up at the White House, let's get it in November, and let's freaking go. You got Pereira, you got Aspinall. If it's gone... yeah, but if Pereira Aspinall for the 3-belt status can't make a fight bigger than that. Okay, on to December. We have one final card left of the year. What do you do? Last year they ended it with a bang. They ended it with Merab versus Jan 2. They ended it with Pantoja versus Van 1. What do you do in December? Who is left? Like we talked about earlier, we're going to do Nunes versus Harrison. Okay, setting up the fight in International Fight Week. Nunes beats Pena, and we finally get this fight. We finally get the biggest and baddest women's fight, okay, in December. We're going to do one whole year later than when was expected. Harrison versus Nunes in December for the Bantamweight UFC belt. All right, and main eventing, the most hype fight after Arman Tsarukyan takes care of Charles Oliveira, we're going to do Ilia Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan. Could you imagine the trash talk? Could you imagine how exciting that this fight would be for all of the fans watching? Okay, listen, UFC, I understand that we're in a big drought right now, but we're really only going to have one champion defending his belt for the first 4 months of the year. Okay, and then by May, it's Khamzat. Okay, we need champions defending their belt again. We don't want division hopping. We want to see them fight the number 1 contender. I want to see Islam versus Gary. I actually do want to see Nunes come back and actually get a big win, even though this is their 4th time fighting. If not, if you have a problem with that, you can do Raquel Pennington. I don't have a problem with that either. I want to see this fight. I want to see, like, if you can make these 6 fights for July, this would be the comeback of the UFC. Okay, I think that the UFC fandom right now, honestly, is at an all-time low. Okay, especially if this fight doesn't happen and this is actually going to be Volk versus Gene Silva. I'm retiring from the sport, okay? Because it just shows that we're heading towards a WWE type matchmaking, and we're not giving the guys who've actually earned and deserve it. Same thing with Merab. Merab might not be the most entertaining fighter out there, although I think he has an argument for being one, and not the most, but a entertaining fighter. Him versus Jan 3 has to be the fight to make. It does not matter how good Sean O'Malley looks at the White House salon. This is the fight to make in July. Especially seeing these big fights. Arman versus Oliveira is huge, especially the second time going at for the BMF belt. And in September, like, I want to see the return of Alexandre Pantoja, especially against someone as dangerous as Tetsuro Taira. Okay, I'm not stacking every card, okay? I'm not saying that Islam's going to fight 3 times in the next 6 months, but what I am saying is that we need to make big fights, and we need them now as a MMA community. Anyways, guys, Jesus loves you. He has a plan for your life. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. See you guys later.